Hi, I'm Snickups.
And my name is Mars.
I'm the conliner and the Agma Schwa viewer here, so this video was my idea. But the language concept belongs to Mars.
I'm also here because Snickups doesn't know how to make videos.
Now, Mars and I play Dungeons and Dragons together. He's the game master of our group, and he's really good at it.
If you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons or are familiar with fantasy tropes, you're probably familiar with the Fae. These beings make their home in another plane of existence, the Feywild. And even if the word Fae sometimes conjures up images of harmless fairies, their folkloric origins portray them as extremely powerful and unknowably strange and eldritch. In our current campaign, Snickups and the other players are slowly uncovering the secrets of an ancient war between mortals and Fae as they explore an alternate North America. The Feywild invaded the mortal world about 25,000 years ago and were fought off by the distant ancestors of the later American peoples, as well as the people of Atlantis. Now, so many millennia later, the players are thrust into the spotlight by the reemergence of forbidden Fey magic, and have been traveling around the American South, talking to archaeologists and researchers and fending off Fey and cultists to get to the bottom of this whole thing. Naturally, that process involves finding texts in both Sylvan and Ancient Sylvan, the language of the Fae.
I'll reiterate that Mars is not a conliner. He likes languages, but has never intended to make a coherent one, nor has he spent any time immersed in linguistics or the conlang community like I have. He talks about Sylvan and the other extraplanar languages like they're eldritch entities. When I showed him Babylon was Seraphim from last time, he decided to make it canon that that's how Celestial works in this setting. So my goal here is to take a bunch of statements by someone who never wanted this language to make sense and form a coherent, if cursed, conline out of them.
Here are the things I have said about Sylvan during the campaign, which Snickups will be working off of. First, Sylvan does not use normal vowels nor consonants. All Sylvan speech sounds like the sounds of nature, with each speaker having a unique aesthetic for their speech, instead of normal vocalizations. You're going to have a mix of sounds from an environment associated with you that you use to speak, and the sounds you make are going to be completely different from anyone else's. For example, a druid in the campaign who comes from the mountains of Tibet speaks in prayer bells and mountain winds, while another character communicates through the sounds of dark caves and deep tombs. The Fae speak this way because in the Feywild everything is Fae. The rocks make rock sounds, the trees make tree sounds, and all can understand each other.
I have to somehow form a coherent phonology out of all this.
Second, when your in-game character speaks in Sylvan, out of game, you have to speak in poetic form, such as rhyming or iambic pentameter, to indicate that you are speaking this language. Other extraplanar languages have similar conditions. I do this to better indicate when players are speaking in a language from outside this world, and to add a bit of strangeness and a touch of difficulty to the whole ordeal.
This was supposed to be a fun thing for the players to do, rather than an in-universe feature of the language, but I'll see what I can do with it regardless.
Third, Fae do not have the same priorities as humans, and among those is the purpose of their language. Many times I've had to remind my players not to think like humans when discussing features of the Fae. While humans regard speaking clearly and actually communicating ideas as a good thing, Fae speak in riddle and in metaphor, actively obfuscating their true purpose no matter the social context.
This one confuses me to no end. I know the whole point was to make them more alien, but it was my job to make a coherent language out of this. I think I came up with some pretty fun stuff, though. Without further ado, how does a language work when every speaker has a completely different set of sounds? Well, all we have to do is make an inventory of phonemes that can each realize as a different sound based on your personal aesthetic, while still fitting a recognizable enough general pattern to be the same phoneme. Instead of being sorted by place of articulation, Sylvan phonemes are categorized based on the classical elements. Elements of articulation, if you will. And we're going with the Chinese elements, not the Greek ones, so instead of earth, water, fire, and air, we have earth, water, fire, metal, and wood, with air falling under the category of metal. Earth sounds can include things like the sounds of shifting sand, falling rocks, scraping stones, or any sound made by burrowing animals. Hey, it's a little bit of involvement from rocks. I'm not sure if the option to put rocks in your phonology is enough to qualify for the rock prize, but I think it's appropriate. Water sounds could be flowing water, bubbles, waterfall noises, or any sound made by aquatic animals. Fire sounds can be crackling or burning noises, or they can be the sounds made by any warm-blooded animal. Metal sounds could be anything made by the wind or any flying animal. I guess it could also be literal metal noises, but I'm not sure how much that fits the aesthetic of Sylvan. Wood sounds could be the sounds of trees doing things, or any animal that lives in trees. These 5 elements of articulation are then crossed with 5 manners of articulation. Background sounds are the Sylvan equivalent to vowels. A syllable consists of a series of 1 or more so-called consonant sounds over a background sound such as wind or rain noises that serves as the equivalent to a syllable nucleus. As for the consonants, there are 4 types: gentle, neutral, strong, and rough. Gentle, neutral, and strong sounds can be any form of sound that matches their element, whether these be animal noises or natural phenomena, as long as each one in a series is louder, clearer, and stronger than the last. Rough sounds, on the other hand, are always the sounds of something breaking, being struck, or otherwise generally not having a good time. Syllables, made of consonants over background sounds, make up the words in the main Sylvan vocabulary. Consonants or other noises by themselves can be used as interjections and other forms of communication outside the normal language. Remember, all the sounds on screen right now are just a generic phonology. When you speak this language, you can fill in this table with whatever sounds you want.
Here's my personal aesthetic.
Sylvan is quite resistant to sound changes, both because their sound inventory is so personal and because individual Fae can live for thousands of years, so there are still some alive who spoke ancient Sylvan 25,000 years ago. However, some changes have indeed taken place. The question remains of how any person, Fae or mortal, could make all these sounds come out of their mouth. Mars has so far refused to answer me on this point.
And I'll never tell.
This one might be my favorite feature of all. Sylvan is both polysynthetic and highly non-concatenative. And by that I mean, many morphemes can be joined together into long word strings that are treated as single words, but within each word, each individual morpheme still has to take a huge amount of non-concatenative marking to demonstrate its exact grammatical role, just as if it were an independent word. So the polysynthesis effectively does nothing! In terms of how the non-concatenativity works, it has some similarities to Semitic consonantal roots, but instead of syntax being determined by vowel placement, it's determined by consonant placement. The background vowels stay constant, while the consonants shift around, with syntactic marking determined by their order and which vowels they fall under the syllables of. Oh, and some forms require more consonants or syllables than a short word might have, so you just reduplicate the first consonant or vowel until you have enough. Sylvan grammar is just as impenetrable as the Fae culture that came up with it. Word order is theoretically free, thanks to case marking, but all phrases are required to come in reverse order of salience, opposite to how human languages operate. Therefore, the subject is almost always placed at the end of the sentence. I'd say that verb-object-subject is the default word order, but object-verb-subject is almost as common. Nouns are marked heavily for case. There are 7 basic cases: nominative, accusative, ergative, absolutive, dative, locative, and comitative. Then there's the genitive case, which agrees with the case of its possessum, the genitive of the genitive, which does the same, and the genitive of the genitive of the genitive, which also does the same. Ergativity is split along participation, with the presence of the first or second person causing a sentence to tend further toward nominative accusative marking, while a sentence with only third person or impersonal, that is zeroth person, arguments is ergative absolutive. And because there are fully separate sets of nominative accusative and ergative absolutive cases, the oddball combinations of nominative absolutive and ergative accusative show up on occasion as middle grounds. In order to be as frustrating and semantically ambiguous as possible, nouns take no marking for number, noun class, definiteness, or any other property, especially not animacy, which Sylvan pays absolutely zero attention to. Adjectives agree with their noun and case. Verbs do not agree with anything and are marked only for aspect. This is my other favorite feature. Again, to be as frustrating and semantically ambiguous as possible, Sylvan is not only completely lacking in tense, but also in mood. There is literally no way of expressing mood, modality, or evidentiality in this language. Is this a statement of fact, or is it an opinion? Is it true, or just something you heard, or are you actively stating falsehoods? Was this in the far past? Will it be in the future? Is it just something that could happen? Are you asking me whether it should? Are you ordering me to bring this about? Or is it all completely hypothetical anyway? That's left entirely up to context and to the wits of the listener. Speaking to Fae is not easy. If Fae ever need to speak to each other quickly in a context that absolutely demands clarity, they don't speak Sylvan. Instead, they mimic animal calls and use the extra linguistic sounds I mentioned earlier. Oh, and for even more ambiguity, the elaborate Navajo-style aspect system of ancient Sylvan has been whittled down over time to just 3: perfective, imperfective, and gnomic. Sylvan speech should be poetic and grandiose. There's a reason they still have a gnomic aspect. It makes for elegant statements. Therefore, one should strive to never use a Sylvan word in its literal sense. Every word can be extended poetically and given metaphorical meanings. To translate the example text, I first rewrote it into a short, free-form poem. Dustlight, by the way, is there to imply small like a speck of dust. Might not be an intuitive meaning to you, but Fae are good at improvising new metaphors on the fly. Here's a gloss of that poem into Sylvan grammar. Notice how when becomes with the time that, turning the next verb into a relative clause, as well as how the questioning what changes at the end becomes a mood-neutral one considers the changes. Also, the aspect shifts from imperfective in the first line to gnomic in the middle of the poem, and then back to imperfective for the last line.
Here's how the Atlanteans would have written the Sylvan forms down into their alphabet.
But that's using the pure word roots and some misunderstandings of the grammar, not the properly inflected word forms. That rendering looks like this. Or more accurately, like this. But that one's still an ancient Sylvan. Updating it to modern Sylvan comes out like this.
And if I were to speak it with my personal sound inventory, it'd actually come out like this.
So there we have it. A language for terrifying extraplanar entities, based on a non-conliner's ideas, with an inhumanly broad system of diaphonemes, and equally inhuman pragmatics. Once again, thanks to Mars for the concept and video editing.
A big thanks to Snickups for the conlanging.
And thanks to Agma Schwa for running this contest.